Welcome to the Friends of Work podcast, the podcast about mastering emotional intelligence at work. In the coming weeks, the Friends of Work podcast with Toye will be bringing you even more exciting guests and events. To support this podcast and to learn more about our future plans, please go to patreon.com/friendsatwork. That is patreon.com/friendsatwork. Thank you. On this episode, the last in my Women at Work profiles for Women's History Month, I had a conversation with Yetunde Odugbesan-Omede. I really enjoyed our conversation because we touched on so many topics. We discussed certain priorities, following your passion, being self-aware about when dealing with difficult people or situations, or when we are the difficult people in the situations. Social awareness in multicultural context, and much more. Here, take a listen.
Hi, my name is Dr. Yetunde Odugbesan-Omede. I'm a professor at Adelphi University where I teach in the International Studies Department. I'm the founder of Young Women's Guide and also CEO of Yetunde Global Consulting.
So that's a lot of stuff right there. And I should first of all say that I admire, just looking at your resume online, I admire all the things that you do. And I wonder, how do you have time to do all of this stuff, and how do you do it and do it well?
Well, thank you so much. I would say that I think I'm a natural multitasker, but with time, of course, I honed in on that skill. And all of the things that I do are things that matter and mean a lot to me, so I prioritize them accordingly. And I try to give as much energy to all the different hats that I wear as possible.
Okay, so when you talk about giving time and energy, how can someone else copy this? I mean, I want to do 10 different things that are important to me. How do I prioritize? How do I make sense of my time? I have only finite time like everybody else. That's the only thing we have in common as human beings. We've got time, 24 hours in a day and no more. Nobody can add to that. Nobody can remove from that. So what's your advice to someone like me who wants to do 10 different things and looks at the time and say, I don't have enough time to do all of these things?
Well, one thing I would say is that it's not about the amount of things that you want to do. You have to really figure out and sit down, what is the things that are natural to me? What are my areas of expertise? Are these things that I actually want to do a reflection of who I am? Because somebody can be doing 20 different things. It doesn't mean that you may have the capability or the capacity to do the 20 different things. They may do 20 different things mediocre, right? Mm-hmm. And you may do 10 different things excellently, right? But you have to figure out what are those things first. Second of all, is priority is extremely important. To prioritize things is a skill. Yeah. Right. Most people are not natural multitaskers. They're not very great at prioritizing. Therefore, you see many people only have the energy and the capacity to focus on one or two things in their life, whether it just be their career. Some people just only have one. Right. And that is kind of how far their capacity goes. But I kind of try to push people to stretch themselves because if you can wear many different hats, it means that you possibly have the capacity to give your all to that. You just have to figure out what that is and be able to equally provide the same amount of energy that you would to something that you love, right? So you have to be doing things that you love to do, not things that you are just forcing yourself to do. Then you will start counting the hours and the minutes and the time, and you're like, oh, I don't have enough time. How am I going to do this? But when you know that this is what is natural to you, this is something that you love, this is something that you see yourself doing and working on in the future, you'll realize that there's actually enough time to dedicate yourself to more than one thing.
Excellent. And so on behalf of someone who's saying, hey, I'm doing the things that I have to do because I'm trying to survive. I'm thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of need at this point, and I'm somewhere at the bottom where it's just
Mhm.
survival. How do you,
Mhm.
what's your advice to that person who is at that point but needs to move further? How do they get out of that uh, place of necessity to the place where they find things that they love and can actually contribute to the world?
So the thing about that is that oftentimes when people are in a survival mode, they are basically looking at the things that are very concrete and tangible, right? I need a house over, I need a roof over my head. I need to have food on the table, things that are concrete and tangible. But the thing about it is that being that we're human and we're complex, there's things that are concrete are not the only things that we also need to survive. We have a spirit, we have a soul, right? Those things also need things that are abstract to survive. So you following your purpose, you following your passion. Maslow may not have that written down somewhere somehow, but I also think that's important to add to the hierarchy of needs for individuals. So yes, there's a point where you are in survival mode to ensure that you have food on your table and shelter and all of those things. And I think that's extremely important because if you don't have that, it will be very hard for you to focus on the things that you cannot necessarily see at the moment, right?
Yeah.
But at some point, you cannot operate your life in totally survival mode every day out. One, it becomes tiring. And second of all, it's almost like you're in a cyclical wheel, right? You never
Mm-hmm.
get to the point where there's a moment of rest where you can actually sit down and evaluate and ask the questions that are necessary to say, why am I here on earth? What am I supposed to do with the time that is allotted to me? What happens is that you use all of that time in survival mode. And there's so many people who are successful who are actually in survival mode
Mm.
because they think that having money, right, and being able to put a roof on your head, maybe a nice expensive one, being able to, drive a car, dine at the most fantastic restaurants is their form of, I don't know, kind of attributing to their, speaking to their needs and their wants. Whereas they've neglected what their whole spirit and soul is about in the world. They've neglected what their purpose, what their passion is, what their service is, the rent that they're actually supposed to pay of taking up space in this world. They've neglected all of that. So what happens is that those people actually they may be successful, but they're burning out deep down inside, to be honest.
Mm. I see that you're talking. I love the ideas you're bringing into this. I see you're speaking not just about survival, but you're also, or not just about physical and tangible things. You're talking about the spirit, the soul, and you're bringing all of this together and saying that there needs to be more value to life than just what you can
Mhm.
get from it. If I hear you
Yeah,
right, I,
absolutely.
I'm in total agreement with you on that. And talking about what you bring to life, um, I let's talk a bit about some of your I'll call them projects at this point in time. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm sure they're bigger than just projects, but let's
Mhm.
start first of all with the Young Women's Guide. What's that about?
So I started Young Women's Guide. I think it was back in 2012. I was a graduate student at Rutgers at the time. And I remember just thinking to myself that I wanted to start an organization that provides leadership development and training for young women. I was blessed to have great mentors and advisors, during my journey of womanhood. And I thought to myself that there's so many talented, gifted, and intelligent women out there who may not necessarily have the same guidance, right?
Yeah.
Who they may not have a mentor in their life. How do we speak to that? How do we provide them with the tools so that when the opportunity does come for them to lead, right, for them to step into a leadership role, they are already prepared and groomed to do so. So that's literally how Young Women's Guide came about, to be honest.
Okay, so I know that you wrote a book and you have an organization. Can you talk about that process? Not just you just talked about the general concept behind it. I think
Hmm.
it's a laudable one. To give back, that which you've been given, especially
Hmm.
if it's something that's not common. And I should note that not many women, especially in today's world, have a lot of good um, guide to use that
Yeah. Yeah.
term, and it's great to have I mean, it's one thing for a man to mentor a woman, but it's another thing for a woman to mentor a woman because she's walked in
Right.
those shoes. And so I'm pretty excited, just thinking of looking at that idea and you bringing it to birth. Can you talk a bit more about what's in the book and what value is it, it's telling young women to have, or what exactly are you trying to accomplish with the book?
So the book is basically off the organization, but most importantly, I thought to myself that if I am not able to physically come in contact with a young woman, right? Maybe she's in another part of the world. Maybe she's in China. Maybe she's in Syria. Maybe she's in Nairobi. Maybe she's in Nigeria.
Mm.
I wanted to write something that any woman, young woman, no matter where they are, no matter their background, no matter their religious, beliefs, can pick up a book and get the same guidance. So in that book, I talk about a lot of the things that I've learned along the way, a lot of the things that I wish I knew, when I was younger. And it's really like a self-help book. So when you pick up the book, you're getting advice on, beware of dream killers, right?
Mm.
The importance of having the importance of having a vision, the importance of tempering your expectations when it comes to mentorship. Why is it important to surround yourself with, positive people? All of these different chapters and it's basically a holistic book that speaks to almost every facet of the life of a young woman. So for me, I just wanted to write something where I know that no matter where you are in the world, you can relate to this book, and it serves as some form of a guidance or at least a compass for you in your journey of womanhood.
Mm. So where can women get this book?
You can get it on Amazon.com. It's also in selected Barnes and Nobles, but it's also on Barnes and Nobles online. You can get it on my website, www.dryetunde.com, the Young Women's Guide website, youngwomensguide.org, and also on Amazon online and Barnes and Noble online as well. And then if you Google the book, I think it's in a lot of other bookstores as well.
Okay, so it's available in hard copy and in electronic
And
format?
Kindle, yes.
Okay, excellent.
Yes.
All right. So I want to talk a bit about. So usually when I have these conversations, as with most conversations in polite society, people don't generally talk about uh, negative things. We usually
Mhm.
try and put a lot of niceties out there and a lot of polite stuff out there about people and situations, but I should know that this is Friends at Work podcast, and our daily lives actually move into areas that are beyond just the general politeness in terms of how interaction with coworkers and sometimes even within family. Uh,
Mhm.
my question is, how do you deal with difficult people? And if you have any examples, you can please talk about very specifics of difficult people and difficult situations, because in my opinion, it's in those difficulties and in overcoming those difficulties that we find some of the best lessons for life that we can pass on to people coming alongside or coming behind, and can say, this is how we went over this mountain, and so you don't have to do this. You don't have to keep hitting your head against this wall over and over again. So uh, to restate the question, how have you dealt with difficult people or situations, and do you have an example? Do you have examples of them?
Um, well, life in general, sometimes it's not easy. You are bound to meet difficult people. You're bound to meet people with different personalities. But the thing about it is that sometimes it's not that the individual is actually difficult. It's that there's just a difference of opinion, a difference of perspective, a difference on the walk of life that someone has, a difference in their tone of how they speak, how they communicate. And so oftentimes in that difference is where conflict arises, right? You don't
Mm-hmm.
see eye to eye with someone, you don't agree with their behavior, you don't agree with what they said, you don't understand why they're doing the things they do, because again, it's just a little foreign to who you are, right?
Yeah.
We only see things from our own perspective, and our perspective is a mix of our beliefs, our values, the way we see the world, the way we were raised, and so forth. So what happens is that we end up really kind of not trying to deal with difficult people, right? We just kind of put them to the side, not really understanding what is the actual reason for the difficulty. So as I got older, I started to realize that, there are many things that cause the breakdown of relationships. Let's just put it that way, right? Doesn't matter if your relationship is surface level. It doesn't matter if it's a deep relationship. It doesn't matter if it's a working relationship. Certain people, right? Different people have what we call, they can project their own insecurities on you, right? So,
Yes.
right. So what happens is that you're dealing with people, maybe they're suffering from, low self-esteem, lack of self-confidence, and that shows up in a different way, whether it's in the office or the workplace, right? Maybe they criticize their work. Maybe they belittle, your own opinions or suggestions. It comes out in different ways, right? So sometimes it's important to get to the root of, and it takes time, why people are the way they are. When you're able to get to the root of it, you'll realize that it's not just them being difficult, is that they're struggling with something that they're dealing with that's being projected on you. So I've had that many, many times where I have dealt with men and women who maybe did not feel secure in their own abilities, whether it's just working on a project, and that came out in a different way. Or maybe some way, somehow, there's a level of feeling threatened, right? Who is this person? She's young. She knows X, Y, and Z. And that shows up in another way. But as you get older, you do have to be able to differentiate between criticism and constructive criticism, people who are behaving in a certain manner but mean well, right? Right.
Yeah.
So not everything is someone having low self-esteem or lack of self-confidence. You kind of have to know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
Okay.
So I think also, yeah. So I think I can stop there without
No,
going to
it's
another
fine. So
topic in a sense.
I want to flip that question. I want to flip it in a way
Mm-hmm.
and say, I want you to actually think about this and think about a time where you were the difficult person. Is there a
Mm-hmm.
time where you've caught yourself being the difficult person as a result of some of the things you've mentioned? And what did you become conscious of in those moments? And is there, what were your teachable moments in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was getting close to the deadline of publishing my book, and I was working um, with a designer, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
remember just wanting things at a certain time, like, okay, is this done? Is this done? We need this to be done. We need this to be done. And I realized that, look, not everybody works on your speed, right? Not everybody works to the same ability that you have. And you have to be respective of people's work ethic, right? You
Mm.
cannot expect people to just drop certain things at the dime to, okay, quickly attend to this need. It doesn't matter how much they're getting paid. Like, you have to be understanding that not everybody it works the way that you work. And
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that the way that they work is wrong, right? It's just
Absolutely.
that you operate differently and you have to be respectful of the way people operate and the way they work and the timelines that they work under and the pressures that they work under. So I also had to check myself in that moment to let myself know that, look, one, it's not all about just my needs at the moment. This person is also probably working on 10 other different projects, right, as a designer,
Yes.
working on 20 other different projects, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to just be patient, right? You
Yeah.
have to be patient. So I definitely learned. So there are definitely teachable moments in my life where I've had to step back and say, you know what, you have to correct this behavior. You have to be accountable for this type of behavior. So definitely yes.
I appreciate that level of self awareness, and I think it's one of those things that um, you assume that people learn as they grow older, but it's not always true, and it's a
Mhm.
great lesson that one learns over and over, or one masters at different levels. Um,
Yeah.
and so this leads me to something. I know that you're first generation American,
Mhm.
and so as someone who comes from, how do I put this? To use the term that I got from you, for someone who comes from a dual background, how has this shaped your worldview living in the born and living in the United States?
I think one, there's a mixture of cultures and values and beliefs that sort of infused in you, right? That creates a whole identity. And I think you have a different way of looking at the world. So when I go to Nigeria, there's a different perspective of how I see Nigeria, right? Than if I was to physically just live there and be born there and live there all my life, right?
Yeah.
There are certain things that I can assess and understand from just a different point of view that I may not have been privy to if I did not have that dual way of looking at the world. And I think it just kind of shapes you into the person that you are, right? You're balancing these two different cultures, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
And you're navigating the American system while still holding on to your cultural values. And your upbringing. So I think it's a colorful experience, if I would put it that way.
Excellent. And so, to rephrase that question again, and I like how you've dealt with it, but I want you to go a little deeper and say, how do you think you see, because I'm trying to address human interaction, right? How does a dual background affect your general understanding of interaction at work, interaction in the family, interaction at play, or even the kind of relationships and friendships that you form? Do you feel that having a dual background, or let me even use this example, how does it affect how you understand politics, for instance? Does it have any influence, and if it does, in what way?
All right, so it's like a two-part question. Okay, so being, of course, that I'm Nigerian, you're Nigerian, there's certain values that we have, values of respecting your elders, right? Values of respecting your parents, right? I don't think that escapes you because you live in the United States. So, I mean, for some, for some it does, but for me it doesn't.
If you live in the larger community, even if your parents
right,
allow
me,
it, right?
Exactly. So for me, it doesn't. However, there's a certain respect I still do have for elders, even if they're not within my culture. But when it comes to the workplace, I think it's a little bit different because you can be the youngest at your workplace and still be the boss of older people, right?
Exactly.
That doesn't necessarily mean you are disrespectful or you have this entitlement thing, but I think just speaking in the Nigerian context and the Nigerian community, there's certain values and teachings that you are taught growing up in a Nigerian household, right? Your education is first. You respect your elders, right? You remember, the house in which you came from, right?
Absolutely.
You got
that lesson too. Okay.
Right. So these are things that you carry with you as you go out into the real world, right? So you make decisions where you have your parents and your upbringing in mind. So meaning that you're not making decisions that will cause any sort of shame or embarrassment on your family, right? You're making decisions that not only is it going to affect your life, but you know that it will affect your family members in a larger context, right? So there's an awareness that I am just not on my own, right? I am attached to a larger community. I am attached to a family, right? So that family unit idea is there. Now, if we move over to politics, I think growing up here, of course, in the United States, you're able to see different forms of leadership. You're able to assess what is a democracy, what doesn't make a democracy, right? You are able to compare and contrast different modes of political systems, right? You are open to that. So now when you go back to Nigeria, right, and you are now assessing Nigeria, the political sphere of Nigeria, through your democratic westernized lens, you see it differently, right?
Yes. Okay.
Well, if you see corruption, if you see bribery, right, these are things that you say, well, this is not a democracy. This is not right. This is a violation of human rights. This is X, Y, and Z, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are looking at it from a little bit of a westernized view, to be honest, right? When you now go back to Nigeria. And when I would say that, how being Nigerian influenced, I would say, my life is that, my parents and I, we will always have conversations about the political sphere of Nigeria, right? We will talk about its issues. We'll talk about corruption. We'll talk about bribery. And that is actually what influenced my graduate study, right? I did my Ph.D. in global affairs, and my dissertation was on corruption in Nigeria. So it literally played a huge role in my life and in my academic journey. So I would attribute that to that. So you hold on to both visions, you hold on to both perspectives, and it serves as some form of a compass for you in life, I would say.
Do you find areas where there are conflicts in that?
There's areas where there's conflicts for many people, and I would say that because for me, not necessarily. Why? Because I have no problem in adhering to some of the cultural upbringings in my life, right? I used to go by Victoria in high school, right? Because I thought that nobody could pronounce my name Yetunde until I got to college and I realized that I'm doing myself a big disservice by not using my Nigerian name.
Mm-hmm.
There are many young people in America who are Nigerian but refuse to use their Nigerian name to assimilate, right, to the American culture, make it just easier in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's the wrong thing to do, right? Because your name is your identity. It tells the world where you come from, right?
Yes.
So even though I'm not born in Nigeria, I'm Nigerian, right? By my name. You know it, right? So these are things where I think people make a mistake by losing their culture. And on top of that, I think, a part of the Nigerian culture, there's certain kind of demands that we do place on young people in terms of marriage, in terms of who they marry, in terms of decisions on how they live their life, the careers that they choose, the majors that they study in college.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people struggle with that in their area, to want to live an autonomous life, but feel some way, somehow, that their culture is not giving them the opportunity or the space to do so. So they come in conflict with that all the time, right?
Yeah, especially people who are talented outside those specific
realms.
That
absolutely
you're supposed to choose.
Absolutely. So you see a struggle among young people in terms of, well, I don't want to marry American. I want to marry someone else. Well, I don't want to study biology. I want to study music, right? They come into this conflict many times. And it's very hard to maneuver because you want to please your family, but at the same time, not to the detriment of your own happiness. So how do you balance the two is what a lot of people struggle with, right?
Yeah.
What do I do, right? So that is a major conflict. My advice to this, what I speak about on this is one.
And so before you get into that, a number of my listeners are not Nigerian, but they have similar cultural conflicts. So what we've just described is not unique to Nigeria. I mean, you talk to a Chinese American, they'll have this similar situation. You talk to so many other cultures, they have similar situations. So what would be your advice to people in this dual cultural conflict situation?
I think it's about finding balance. So if you feel that your culture in some way has a certain demand on you, where it's infringing upon your happiness and your autonomy to be, you have to find a balance, right? So we all want to make some way, somehow, a part of us wants to make our family proud, right? So if you are already majoring into a major or already in a career that your family or your parents have already picked for you, my advice for you to do is to find something outside of your career that speaks to your own happiness, whether it's a passion project, whether it's an entrepreneurial pursuit that you want to do, whether it's a business, go ahead and do it anyway. You don't have to limit yourself to just doing one thing in life. You don't have to just have one career in life, right? You can do multiple things. So don't stifle yourself and say, okay, I only can live to what my parents said I should do or the advice that they've given me. They've given you advice, yes, and you may have chosen their advice, but that's not the end all be all. Use the time that you have now wisely to branch out and do something else that speaks to you. Doesn't matter how different it is from your field or from your career. Now, when it comes to dating, very difficult. There's a lot of things that you have to put into place, right? Dating is not only just about dating within your culture. My husband is Nigerian, so it's a little bit different, but he was born here, so we're kind of like the same.
Exactly.
But for those, but for those who are finding it difficult of who to date, should I date out of my culture? Will my parents agree with this? Love is very important. You have to marry who you love, but most importantly, you have to understand that and be willing to understand that when you do marry outside of your culture, you have to be able to understand the differences that it may bring, right? Be able to deal with that and be able to be the bridge the gap, right? Bridge the gap between both families, be that linking pin, right? That brings both families together so that there's no, I would say, hiccup or there's no hesitation to your relationship because of a difference of culture, right? So that also, so you're going to have to balance that as well. So it's really all about balance, right? At the end of the day, your parents have one idea for your life, but the ultimate person that has that, main idea is God. So that's kind of where I leave that. Excellent.
Thanks a lot for that. And I'm sure somebody's going to benefit from what you just talked about there. I'd like you to compare your experience. I know you've worked a bit outside the U.S. I want you to compare your experience working in Africa with working in the United States. And can you do a compare and contrast? And what I'm looking for particularly is what are the kind of relationships that you form? Okay, before you jump into that, let me also give you an example. One of my guests on this show has worked on like 4 or 5 on 4 different continents and several countries, some of them from 6 months to 3 years. And she said her very insightful examples of the kind of friendships that she has at work while she was working, say, in Niger versus while she was working in Spain versus while she was working in India versus while she was working in the U.S. and how those relationships differ because of the different societal values and cultures. So in the same way, I would like you to compare and contrast your experience in working, say, in South Africa or doing projects in Nigeria versus doing it in the U.S. and the kind of work relationships that you had you have in those contexts.
Well, I would say it's a little bit different just in terms of just the work relationships. I think just primarily because of the culture. In Nigeria, a little bit of South Africa, these are, to be honest, they're patriarchal societies, okay? So regardless if you are a successful woman, your success is often linked to that of your husband, your father, or some other man, okay? So oftentimes, just you have to be aware and cognizant of the cultural cues that are within society. So, of course, if I'm going into a meeting in the United States, I don't have to prostrate for anyone, right? Well, okay. I don't have to I don't have to kneel down. I don't have to be, aware of who's really in the room. How do I speak to someone? How do I say certain things so they don't take offense? X, Y, and Z, right? It's not as heightened as it is in Nigeria or in African countries. So you have to be very aware of all of those different things, right? And because you are a woman, there's a woman, to be honest, there's a tendency where I have felt where, a man will sort of question your ability. And if they don't question it, almost kind of make advances to you in a sense, regardless of whether you have a ring on or not.
Yes.
So you have to be very aware of all of those things. And there's a certain way you sort of handle yourself. There's a certain way you show up in the room. There's a certain decorum that you show. I mean, here in the United States as well, but it's just a little bit different, I think, dealing with patriarchal societies that um, often tend to try to, in different nonverbal ways, diminish your your capabilities in a way that you necessarily wouldn't see in the United States, but you would see it in the United States because there are women who are dealing with sexual harassment in the workplace, right? So
Yeah.
it's almost just a different way of doing it, right? It's just a different form. And I think dealing in Nigeria, it's not you have to just invoke the cultural demands that are placed upon you as a woman and bring that to your meetings and bring that to your workplace. And if you don't, there will be a tendency to write you off, right? So you have to really be smart on the way that you maneuver, I think, in different contexts. I think when you work abroad and when you work in different parts of the world, I think you become more aware and more skillful and more versatile in how you deal with people, I would say.
That's great. So you brought out a point that I find I think would be extremely useful is social awareness. And that is one of the skills that one needs in emotional intelligence. And as being Nigerian too, I totally get what you mean by social awareness. This is absolutely true, whether you're male or female, even though it's a little different if you're a female in a patriarchal system. But still, being socially aware, knowing how to play to the different people within your audience and knowing not to cause offenses by attitude or word or even certain suggestions that you might have or how you present your views. I think it's a skill that one learns pretty early and learn fast, even if you don't learn early when you go into those systems and or into those societies, and also to mention that, well, this is not it's not only sexual harassment is not only an American thing,
right? It's all over the world. It's a global thing.
It's a global problem. But moving on a little bit from that, and as we start rounding off this conversation, I want to ask, and talking to you has been really interesting, especially when you've talked about Young Women's Guide, you've talked about being a CEO of, is it Dr. Yetunde or Yetunde Consulting?
Yeah, Yetunde Global Consulting.
Yetunde Global Consulting, and being a professor, being a wife, being a mother, and many other things, producing a podcast. What else aren't you doing? I mean, the picture I have of you is this proverbial picture of a woman talking on the phone, cooking, directing the office, taking care of, changing the kids' diapers all at the same time.
Yep, basically. Yep, to be honest, literally. Yeah,
I've seen a skit
that
about
is the right
that,
picture.
And I'm like, okay, that's multitasking right there.
Yes, that is the right picture.
So the question is, what drives you? And what is that distant goal that motivates you to do the things that you do? You said you talked about, do the things you love. But yes, doing the things you love, what's that? Do you have like a central theme that motivates you to go in the directions and do all the things that you're doing right now?
Yeah, like I definitely feel like I have a purpose, for my life. I definitely feel that everything that I do is rooted in some form of service, right? So if it's my career, as a professor, I'm teaching students, right, about the world. I'm giving them the tools that they need to go out into the world and be productive citizens, whether in the workforce or outside of it. If it's my podcast, I'm talking about areas that will help people in their leadership development or personal development. If it's Young Women's Guide, I'm trying to build the next generation of female leaders, right? If it's writing books, my books are really focused on leadership and how someone can put their best self forward. If it's my business, it's in providing leadership development and leadership training and human capital management so organizations, corporations, and businesses can perform to their best capability. So everything around me that I do, the central thing is leadership. It's providing something to someone so that they can be good or be the best at whatever it is they do. And I feel that you are most successful when you find out what area of service you are willing to provide. And I feel having purpose in life is also connected to your service. Purpose is not just about you. It's about how can you use your talents and your gifts to make a difference and an impact in the lives of people who you come in contact with or extendedly. So for me, what drives me is the essential fact that I know that everyone on this earth has some form of purpose. I know that there's something specific that God wants to do through me, and it would be of waste if I don't utilize or discover every talent and gift that has been, kind of, bestowed upon me. So I think that is what I'm doing with my life, basically utilizing and discovering every talent and gift that has been God-given and turning that into a form of some form of service for others.
Excellent.
If that makes sense.
That makes sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah, and more importantly, it makes sense to you.
Yeah.
So, how can my audience support you in some of these endeavors? I know some of what you do is non-profit oriented, and people can, like the Young Women's Guide and probably some other things. How can we support your projects, and what projects are you working on? Can you give some specifics and how we can support?
Yes, definitely. Always purchase a book for someone you know who's in need, whether it's a young person, a young woman, Young Woman's Guide. You can purchase that online. Just Google the book title and my name. But we, Young Women's Guide, is having monthly leadership workshops. Right now it's held in Newark, New Jersey. It's sponsored by Rutgers University in Newark. So if you know anyone who's within the New York, New Jersey sort of tri-state area, these are free leadership workshops. So I usually post them on my Instagram. My Instagram name is I am Yetunde. So please feel free to forward that to them if that may be of benefit to them.
Instagram handle again?
So it's I am and my name Yetunde. So I am Yetunde.
Go
on. Also, subscribe, like. I have a YouTube page where I give out inspirational videos. Subscribe, like, and share to that. Also have a podcast, so subscribe, like, and share to that as well.
How can we get
I post
your
a lot of.
podcast?
It's on SoundCloud or on iTunes. You can Google it, and I put always the latest episode on my website, www.dryetunde.com. And I usually post a lot of the things that I'm doing on my Instagram page and social media page. So that's a way to definitely engage. And you can always donate monetarily to Young Women's Guide as well. That helps us with a lot of the programs that we're doing and future programs that we're planning. But most importantly, our goal is really to help us spread the word about the workshops and the leadership trainings that we're currently doing for free for young women. So that's the most important thing.
Excellent. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I say, Godspeed, and continue to be an inspiration to all the women around you.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for listening to this episode. You can support this podcast by going to patreon.com/friendsatwork. That's patreon.com/friendsatwork. You can also reach me by email at myfriendtoye@gmail.com. My Facebook page is Friends at Work Podcast, and my Twitter handle is at Friends at Work US. Join me next time for another episode of Friends at Work Podcast with Ade Toye. Bye for now.